All right, good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Reg Hoyt. I am co-chair of Animal Biotechnology and Conservation, and I have the great fortune of working with a whole slew of very interesting faculty members who are also interested in the One Health concept. And so I imagine that most of you have been to a One Health. How many of you have never been to a One Health seminar before? Good. So there are a few of you who might actually hear what I have to say interesting. Others will be going, yeah, he says that all the time. One Health. So One Health is a concept that's been around for quite some time. For the most part, the concept has been linked to disease transmission between humans to wildlife, whether that's domestic wildlife or whether it's wild wildlife, or the other way around. So the idea of health. Good examples of this, recent examples of this, are like the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. You have individuals who are consuming bushmeat. The bats, in this case, had Ebola. It jumped from the bats to humans and then became an epidemic. And so there's been a whole lot of effort around the world to try to control things like that. Our concept of One Health, though, is much broader than that. In wildlife management, and how many of you are wildlife management? A whole bunch of you. In wildlife management, we've always said that wildlife management is really related to a triad: the environment, animals, and humans. That's One Health. The interactions between these, inextricably, we're linked. What we do to the planet also happens to animals. Animals, in turn, can affect our livelihoods, us as well. Why not take this concept and integrate it across everything that we do? I don't care what major you're in, One Health fits as a concept for you. As an example of that, tonight we've got people from a variety of different backgrounds who are going to talk about what One Health means to them, and we're going to engage you in conversation, right? We're going to get you guys involved with this as well, to talk about what this is and maybe think about how your courses would mean a lot more to you if you can fit it into the broader perspective of your careers and your life as a whole. So we've got a moderator tonight who's going to help us out. But before we get into that, I want to remind you that Thursday night at 5:30 in Momgus is going to be a memoriam for those who were lost in Pittsburgh. So please come out for that. It's a horrible day in our history, and we need to mark it. So thank you for coming out tonight. Sign-in sheets for students are up here. For the adults in the audience, if you'd like to hear emails from me about upcoming One Health, just sign in down here for email addresses. I promise I won't send you too many. Thank you.
So, hello. Oh, nice. Okay, so those of you who don't know me, I am Alicia Shenko. I'm also in the Animal Biotechnology and Conservation Department. You may see me in some of your classes. But tonight, I'm moderating this faculty forum, and as Reg pointed out, One Health is really more than just thinking about diseases, right? We're thinking about the entire interaction and interplay of people, animals, and the environment. Right? And so the purpose of this faculty forum was more so to help engage you all and see how it actually interplays in different parts of our campus and how different parts of our campus community are interacting with the greater community in Doylestown and in the globe, really, with some faculty members. And so the faculty forum here, the purpose is these are faculty members, right, from your various departments, and they're going to talk to you about how they see, well, I guess we have more than just a faculty member, we have a dean too, sorry. Dean Casas. And so what we want from you is interaction. We want you to see how this One Health concept interacts with things outside of that disease idea, and we want some interaction with you and for you to ask questions and have an open forum discussion about One Health. And so those of you who've been to other One Health seminars, this is going to be different. This is not just a presentation and then you can walk out, right? We want some introductions, some ideas, and answering the question of what One Health means to you, right? And what does One Health mean to you, right? So think about how you would answer that question as some of our faculty members and Dean talk about what One Health means to them. Does that sound good? Maybe a little bit. Thanks for the enthusiasm. I appreciate it, right? And I'm just putting it out there. If everybody's feeling a little bit tired, feel free to jazz hands all you want, right? I won't start calling on you until a little bit later, okay? But if I don't see anybody, if everybody's kind of going like this, you know I'll jazz hands you all. So be warned. Okay. Who wants to go first? Do you want to go first?
My name is Kayla Leary, and I'm an animal science major as a freshman this year.
Hello, I'm Dennis Levrone. I'm an adjunct faculty in the Landscape Architecture and Environmental Science program. I'll tell you more about that later when it's my turn to speak. And I also teach a course in the Policy Studies Master's program.
So we're just doing introduction? Okay. Hi, I'm Tanya Casas. I'm the Dean of Business and Humanities. I'm the academic director of our public policy program, the same program that Dennis teaches in, and I'm also an associate professor of sociology.
I'm Sarah Doley. I'm an assistant professor in the plant science department. My background is plant breeding and genetics, and I mostly teach classes on crop production.
I'm Karen Schramm, and professor of English. Karen Schramm, professor of English. And one of my specialties is environmental literature, and I'm very big on environmentalism.
Kim Johnston. I'm instructor in the biology department, and I know so many faces out there. I see a lot of familiar faces from genetics, right? So I do teach genetics here at Del Val, and I also teach immunology, as well as getting the opportunity to teach some of the first-year students in biosci and some non-majors in nat sci.
Bill Veal. They let me loose from the business department. You get out every once in a while. I teach primarily economics and international business, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay, very good. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, as you can see, or you may already know, Professor Hoyt is sort of the catalyst for bringing One Health to Del Val, and the rest of us serve on the planning committee, and I guess that's part of the reason why how we got drafted to be up here tonight. So from the show of hands, you know, it looks like most of you are familiar with One Health, and as we go through and you see the different connections between what each of us, specific fields that each of us profess in, think about how the interconnections are. And that's what I'm going to talk about just real briefly. And I'm used to taking notes with slides, so to speak, so or organizing my thoughts through PowerPoint, just a bad habit I got into. So if I can get this going here. There we go. So that's sort of the theme of what I want to talk about. I just have 3 or 4 slides here. And I may not look familiar to any or most of you because, students, because I'm only on campus spring semester for one of my courses, which I'll talk about in a minute, and also every other fall for the graduate course I teach in Professor Dean Toss's program of policy studies. So these are my two courses. So in the landscape architecture and environmental science department and major, I teach regional land use planning, and that's every spring. So there's probably a fairly good chance that some of you will take that course as a restricted elective or just as a general elective. And then, do we have any graduate students here? Anybody in a graduate program? Well, maybe somewhere down the line we'll see you in the policy studies graduate program, and then you'll be able to possibly take contemporary urban and regional planning. So talking about interconnections, what I thought I would do is just right off the bat, related to the stuff that I teach here at Del Valle. You know, if you look at the landscape architecture program requirements, major, that, you know, directly correlates to the people and society segment of the One Health triad that Professor Hoyt and Dr. Schenko were talking about. And then environmental science majors, obviously the environment, directly and indirectly to other things. And then if you're a conservation and wildlife major, that obviously connects with the plants and animals part of the triad. So just to get you thinking about offering some comments or discussion about things that I teach here at Del Valle, which include planning and zoning. Planning, which is typically land use planning, and there's also many other kinds of planning, ties in with zoning, that ties in with health. Some of you may not know much or anything at all about zoning. You may have heard of it, but the original impetus for zoning started in New York City in the early 1900s when the tenement buildings became overcrowded, and the city decided they needed to regulate what was going on there from a public health standpoint. So planning and land use has always, in some way or another, had a direct or indirect connection to health. Now, the American Planning Association, which is our professional organization for planners, has a very strong educational program. One of the things that they have is this segment called Planning for Zoning and Health in the Built Environment. And I'm just going to take you right to, I'm going to use it as an example of one thing, then I have one other example, and then I'll open up the discussion. Hopefully, we'll be able to connect here. So if you go to this particular web page of the American Planning Association, it's like a module of information, planning and zoning for health in the built environment. If we go down to the functional plans, section 9, click on that, and then that will take us to, I can find it here, yeah, here it is. Our local, actually regional planning agency here in southeastern Pennsylvania is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and they're putting out reports on various issues that encompass the whole region here. It's a 10-county region here in southeastern Pennsylvania, 5 in southeastern Pennsylvania, and actually it's 9 counties, 4 in New Jersey. And in 2011, they came up with this report called Eating Here, Greater Philadelphians, a Food System Plan. So, you know, it's a long thing, and I'm obviously not going to go through it, but if you get a chance to take a look at this, if you're in agriculture or conservation wildlife management or specializing in a food specialty, it's a very interesting report to look at, and you'll soon see that it makes many different connections between health, food, and sustainable agriculture. So that's one example. So I'm going to ask the food people or even the animal science people to think about maybe throwing that into the discussion here in a minute. And then the other thing that planners, designers, landscape architects, engineers, municipal officials do regarding land use in our communities. And a current hot topic and trend is to move more towards what we call walkable communities, making communities more accessible to just getting around on foot, bicycling, less automobile driving. But we've built our suburbs to be automobile dependent. So the trend is to try and get back to more of a walkable society. So I'm going to leave you with this little ditty that's on the Surgeon General's website, because again, walkable communities are geared towards, or part of the impetus for walkable communities is to improve people's health through additional exercise.
Meet the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. His job is to help everyone stay healthy. And he's asking us to help him with an important health issue, being physically active. People aren't moving like they used to. These days, only half of American adults get enough physical activity to reduce their risk of heart disease and diabetes. This is a concern for our nation's top doctor. The good news is that walking and wheelchair rolling are great ways to include regular physical activity in our lives and can be easy ways to stay healthy. But the problem is that people aren't walking because of their busy schedules, or maybe they don't have safe and easy places to walk. However, we can change this. The Surgeon General wants our help. We can step it up and take some simple steps to walk more. We can walk to school, or we can walk to the bus or train to get to work. Or we can turn our meetings into walking meetings. Walking can also help us connect with people more and build a strong community. It's a great way to spend time catching up with friends and loved ones too. But we also need to make our communities more walkable, since not everyone has a safe, convenient, and nice place to walk. We can work together to help get more parks and sidewalks in our communities. Or we can mobilize cleanup efforts to make places where people walk safe and attractive. Or we can help make our communities more walkable by being part of our community planning, and much more. If we all step it up and get walking, we can make this a more walkable nation. Find out more about Step It Up, the Surgeon General's call to action to promote walking and walkable communities by visiting www.surgeongeneral.gov. Together, with all of our help, we can make a difference.
So have any of your professors done a walking class with you? I mean, other than the classes where you go around and identify tree species? I hadn't thought of that before, so I'm going to try and incorporate some walking classes into my courses next time I teach them here. So that seems like a pretty good idea, weather permitting, of course, or maybe even bad weather. What's that? In spite of the weather. Thank you. Excellent idea. Let's just think about the things you saw in this video. Were there what kinds of things in there may have given you some ideas of how we all could, or how you individually could, or we as individuals could contribute to our overall cumulative better health by following some of these ideas in here? Anybody? Yes. Okay. Could you give her the mic?
Getting up high.
Oh, could you repeat that? Sorry.
So yeah, getting a pet is a good way to, like, it makes you keep walking because you have to walk them like twice a day.
Uh-huh.
So that's a good mandatory workout that you get every day.
Sure. Yeah, very good. Anybody else? Yes.
I think that like cleaning up after yourself, like if you are like walking, especially around campus, I think people have been better about it lately. But like in the past, like there's like this trash around Lake Archer and like around like walking places. Like I think that having a clean space to walk around in does make it a lot more of an enjoyable experience for everyone involved. So.
Right, so that could be a chicken and egg thing. You could do the walking to help clean the place up or keep the place clean, and then you can walk just for enjoyment rather than having to pick up trash. That's a good one, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, in the back, back there. It's an excellent question. Because, you know, different communities, as you're pointing out, are different as far as financial resources. There are any number of, and I couldn't even give you, you know, I couldn't even guess at the number, but there's any number of various governmental grants out there for getting funding for just exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. And some of those grants are geared to more towards communities that can't afford, that don't have a big tax base and have possibly blighted conditions and things like that. So I'm not an expert on all the grant availability, but I know that they're out there, and we've got people working in the planning field that's all they do all day is find grants for communities. So it's definitely doable. There's no reason not to pursue those kinds of funds if you're a community. Good question. What was, well, I'll just, was somebody else have a question?
You have one more.
Oh, one more, okay, go ahead, because I'll wrap up then.
What about just more nice landscaping, so when you're walking around the neighborhood, I mean, we have all these ugly monocultures, i.e. the lawn.
Yes.
We need something far better, even just letting your grass grow.
Yes. Yeah, no question. I think we've made a lot of mistakes in the past with the way we've laid out, built, and lack of landscaping on our communities. A lot of those things could be possibly retrofitted, you know, funding permitting. But certainly, any new construction, any new communities ought to be avoiding that kind of problem. And as I said, speaking of interconnections, which is what, you know, the One Health is all about, in the last probably 2-3 decades, and as we move forward, I've been seeing a lot more cooperation between the different professions involved in the planning field, the engineers, planners, landscape architects. So I'm encouraged that things should get better to avoid what you're talking about. Okay, so I guess that's about enough for me, right?
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
And so thank you for his introduction, right? What One Health means to him, right? Now, Dean Casas, could you tell us what One Health means to you?
I can. Can you hear? Okay, this is working. I just have to say, One Health concept is a concept that I really dig. It's all about interconnections, and as a sociologist, we're trained from the get-go to think about the way the world is interconnected. Any of you guys take Sociology 101 yet? Somebody? Maybe? No. Okay, well, one of the first concepts, one person up there, okay. So one of the first concepts you'll be introduced to in sociology, one of my favorite concepts, a concept by 1950 sociologist named C. Wright Mills, is the sociological imagination. And it's a really basic concept. And the idea of the sociological imagination is that, you know, we're born into a society that already exists. There are structures, there's culture, there's history. When we think of, it forces you to think, you know, when something happens, let's trace the context within which that happens. You know, what's the history behind, you know, why something happens, why there's an Ebola outbreak, why we have the types of communities we have that are not walkable. What's the history behind that? Why have we built our environment a particular way? When we look at market relations or economic relations, how they impact why we do things the way we do, what's the culture behind that, what are family relationships like? You know, we have to pay attention to everything. What's the environment you interact in? So from that perspective, when I think of One Health, I see it very aligned with sociology. We tend not, you know, I'm a sociologist, I tend to look at groups, I tend not to look at the individual. I understand the individual within the context of the group. So when we think of going back to the Ebola, as Reg mentioned, or Professor Hoyt mentioned, you know, when we think of the Ebola outbreak, how are we going to respond to that? You know, what are the conditions within any country that have led to the propensity of there being a greater outbreak or less? And I think we have to, let's see, we have to pay attention to, I'm losing my train of thought here, but when it's a sleep thing, I was talking about that before. But overall, I think with sociology, we focus on people. In the One Health circle that we saw, people shape, you know, we shape our environment, we shape our built environment, and that has real impacts, and, you know, it has this, there's a feedback loop. Sociologists also pay attention to forms of solidarity. So how is it that we interconnect with one another? How is it that we interconnect with our environment? And how, over time, the ways we are interconnected with one another has changed, whether it be through our belief systems or the way we survive. So increasingly, you know, how many of you guys grow your own food? All of your own food. You might grow some of it. How many of you guys make your own clothes? How many of you guys teach yourself the subjects you learn? Educate yourself. You go and you get educated by someone, you buy food from someone, and you may do some of this on your own. Some of you might knit, but we're very interdependent, right? And this is the way we're connected to one another. And increasingly, that interconnection has expanded across the globe. So when we think of One Health, we have to recognize that we are connected to one another across the globe in ways that we sometimes don't even understand. And in order to address some huge problems that we may have, particularly climate change, we have to recognize these interconnections, because if we want to contribute to change, and we don't understand those interconnections, yes, we can make individual choices. We can walk in our communities, right? We can make the choice to walk. Individuals can try to be healthy. But if you're not changing broader structures, you're going to reproduce potentially negative behaviors, because they're part of the broader culture that are fed into by our economy, by our particular relations, by our politics, by power relations. So as a sociologist, this is what I'm trained to pay attention to. We'll stop there. Otherwise, I can continue to ramble on.
Does anybody have questions directly for Dean Casas before we move on? Introductions of what One Health means to you.
So I'm Sarah Doley in plant science, and I'll jump right in. So I think about food production a lot, and so that clearly involves the environment, plants and animals, and society as a whole. Right? And so I'm trying to think of I picked two examples because they're both really interesting to me. One is manure management, which I had never thought about before I moved to Pennsylvania. And then the other one is biodiversity, which which I've thought about for a really long time. That's actually what got me excited about studying agriculture. So manure management first, thinking about Pennsylvania as a little microcosm. Pennsylvania produces a lot of eggs and a lot of dairy and a lot of meat, and to do that we have to import animal feed in the form of grain, and in that grain is a whole bunch of phosphorus and nitrogen, the nutrients that the animals need for growing and for producing milk. And whatever doesn't go into the animal's growth gets passed through as manure, so then you end up with this really rich source of nitrogen and phosphorus in the form of manure that you have to figure out how to get it on your agriculture fields so that your plants can then have this phosphorus and nitrogen. And if you have too much of it or it's in the wrong space, then it ends up in your waterways, and we end up with the contamination problem that we have in the Delmarva Peninsula. Who's heard of the water problems down there? Who is this news to that we have pollution in our waterways? Right. So it's because we have too much manure in Pennsylvania, but manure is a valuable asset to farmers who don't have enough nutrients in their field. So if we can figure out how to deal with this problem, figure out what to do with the nutrients, then we won't have polluted waterways. Instead, we'll have more fertile crops. So that's one. So I think about manure a lot now, which I didn't. So I'd studied agriculture in California before, and it's not as much, you don't think about it out there because the animal and plant agriculture is so separated. You have your feedlots, and I don't know what they do with all that manure they accumulate, and then you have your crop production, which is what I was working in, and we use synthetic fertilizers because they're cheaper, they're easier to transport, they're easier to apply, they're easier to control. But manure has all these special benefits. It's just more of a challenge, so we get to deal with that in the Northeast because we have very close animal plant agriculture because of the size of our farms and the size of the market. So that's interesting and challenging. And then the other thing, the biodiversity. So some people talk about monoculture in agriculture, right? Crop uniformity, it has its benefits because then you can mechanize agriculture, you have uniform yields, you can have uniform markets, stuff like that. But then on the other end, you have risks of like the potato famine or the southern leaf corn blight. Familiar to people, right? They've heard of that? Where we had large-scale monocrops and we had a new disease come in, bad weather, bad disease, large-scale crop failure. The potato famine in the 1800s resulted in a lot of deaths. The southern corn leaf blight happened in the U.S. in the early 1970s. No deaths, but economic trouble for people because there was too much of a uniform section of DNA in all the corn crop. It wasn't even that everyone was planting the same type of corn. It was that all the corn had a small region of cytoplasmic DNA that was the same, and then all the corn failed. Okay, so farmers, researchers have figured out that biodiversity in agriculture is important to prevent large-scale crop failures. But how do you achieve that biodiversity? Where does that genetic variation come from? And a lot of it comes from potentially crop wild relatives, right? So before there was corn, there was teosinte. Before there were the pinto beans, the kidney beans, the navy beans that you eat, there were wild beans. And they look a lot like the domesticated beans, but they're smaller, they don't yield as good. But wild beans, I'm going to talk about that because it's my background, they grow from Argentina to Canada, right? From mountain peaks to the ocean in dry areas and wet areas. And so they've been evolving for millions of years, crop wild relatives, to grow in these niche climates, right? And to fight with pathogens that they encounter in their niche climates. And so we've taken them out of those and domesticated them and lost a whole bunch of that genetic diversity during domestication, which is okay. But if we need that diversity for, say, climate change so that we can breed crops that can withstand drought, that can withstand storms, that can withstand diseases, then we need to be able to access that genetic diversity from the crop relatives. So we can preserve that, and there's two ways. You can do ex situ preservation, where you collect seeds from the wild and put them in gene banks, sort of like a giant freezer. There's a big one, Svalbard up in Norway. The USDA has a lot of gene banks. So that's a great place where you can get a whole lot of genetic diversity, stick it in a freezer, and keep it relatively safe for a while. But you stall evolution when you do that, right? Because things are just put in a freezer. Another way to preserve genetic diversity is in situ, in the area where they're evolving. So preserving open spaces, and preserving traditional farm practices, maybe with zoning laws, and by doing that, then the plants can continue to evolve in in a changing climate and maybe acquire new genetic mutations that will allow them to grow despite climate change or something like that. So that's what I was thinking about before I came. Manure and nutrient cycles, and then the need to preserve genetic diversity in crop wild relatives.
So we can kind of summarize that as like manure and beans.
Manure and beans.
Manure and
Yep.
beans.
It's
Perfect.
It's
Excellent.
full of beans.
What does One Health mean to you? Manure and beans.
Manure and beans. Most things mean that. Yeah.
Anybody have any questions directly for Dr. Doley? Okay, we can move right on. Oh, we have one. We have one. Yay! We'll come back to that.
Yeah, so one of the really wonderful features about humanities is that we get to address every issue that is important in any way. When you think about One Health, it's about people and society, it's about plants and animals, and it's about the physical environment, which we all call home. So if we tamper with anything, we ruin everything. And I think about Aldo Leopold, the great father of wildlife ecology, in his work called Land Ethic. And he says that, you know, what we need to do is grow, we need to evolve, we need to stop being so anthropocentric. We're so self-centered, so man-centered, that we tend to think that it's normal and right and proper to go around being a conqueror. But the reality is that we have to change. We have to evolve ethically into just a plain member, a plain citizen of the biotic community. We're just not any more important, or at least we shouldn't think that we're any more important. Although I know people like to say, well, we're at the top of the food chain, you know, we're what matters. No. So if you think about it, you might not care about a tree. Well, might not care about a forest. You go and clear cut it because we need paper and other products. And you might not care about soils because, after all, well, they're just dirt. And they're a lot more complex than that. But, you know, we might not care about it. And yet, if you get a big storm and the trees have been cut down, the roots aren't going to anchor the soil, and there's this terrible mudslide, and it goes downhill, and it falls right on all the houses and all the people, and just submerges everything, and they're destroyed. You know, suddenly you do care because it's your friends and family that died. It comes back to bite you. So he said that we need a land ethic which enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, animals, or collectively the land. He also says that a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, and it is wrong when it tends otherwise. That's something that we need to think about. You know, he also said that we have to know something. We have to understand the land. We have to know something before we can love it. We have to love something before we can protect it. It's a problem when we're so divorced from the community of nature, when we suffer from nature deficit disorder, that we don't understand the implications. And again, it's whether we care about one aspect of the triad or not, it's ultimately, we do tend to care about ourselves and our family and friends. And yes, if we don't pay attention to One Health, it's all going to come back and bite us.
Dun, dun, dun. Question? Can I go here first? Okay.
Hi. I find what you said very interesting. Like, if we don't know or if we're not affected, I find people don't understand until something affects them. I have friends who lived in the Philippines and families. When they kept chopping down the trees, everybody thought it was great for the economy. But then when the floods came, homes were destroyed because there was nothing to absorb the water and protect the villages and the towns. So I think education starts very early, and especially with some programs starting earlier in schools about teaching children about farms and growing your own food, and they could appreciate it. Do you guys encourage the students at all to maybe get involved in schools to teach them, like in grammar schools, as part of maybe their education, to reach out and work with younger kids on appreciating where their food comes from?
If you're asking me in particular, I'll say it depends on the course. If I'm doing college writing 1 or 2, I might not necessarily say that. If I'm doing environmental literature, I certainly would, because One Health calls for me to speak up. It calls for me to educate. It calls for me to be an environmental activist and an environmental philanthropist, and so I am. And I certainly do think it's very important that we think about the big issues, and we stop the way we have of simplifying something like we tend to think, oh, well, we go into the Pacific Northwest and we want to cut down trees, and oh, there's this owl, the spotted owl, and then there's us, and it's jobs versus an owl. You know, it doesn't matter if it's in the Philippines or in the Pacific Northwest or wherever it happens to be. We just tend to have a very reductive attitude, and I think the younger you do start educating people about interconnection, the better off you are.
Yes, we do educate people. We have an education program, K through 12 ag education program here on campus. So we train students to teach about agriculture, to teach about food systems.
Yes, so as I was listening to you, my brain was alerting me to a study I did with the vegetarian people and how they impressed me 20 years ago, that a real game changer and a real solution would be to eliminate meat. And when I was listening to you, my green lights and the sirens were going off in my head. I still haven't cut out meat, and I do believe the vegetarians are very, very accurate and very true. The facts are very true and very accurate, and I haven't changed my diet. I love meat, but I can muster motivation to do that, and I think that if somebody commercialized plant-based foods in such a beautifully commercial way to compete with the established fast food restaurants, I mean, I think they can do it. But I think that the vegetarians have, if you agree, have a real solution. It's nothing that I'm saying. It's just that I'm too lazy to, really too lazy to take that big step, because I really need to eat delicious food to satisfy me emotionally. And so I think so does everyone else. So how do you respond to what I'm saying about the vegetarians having what I think is the solution, or a main component to a solution? There's probably different components. But I wanted to say something about getting recreational activities involved in our daily work life. Like I think Japan, they have these fun recreational recesses like we used to in elementary school. Kids go out and play. I think we can burn a lot of calories and at the same time eat plant-based foods, which I think create the kind of world and environment that we're all talking. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's difficult because there's the fact that something tastes good, and I can say we can speak theoretically, but practically speaking, I'm a meat eater too. Vegetarianism would solve a lot of problems it certainly would be a great solution in so many ways, but it comes down to perceived quality of life. And if you've grown up eating meat, I really don't think like the world is ready to become vegetarians. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy in people. You know, we're human and humans are flawed. And I don't have a definitive answer to that.
While I do agree that vegetarianism would solve a lot of our problems, and not only just in health problems, but a lot of how we produce the meats that we eat, such as like burgers, you know, our cows, pigs, a lot of the production of that hurts the animals. It doesn't give them a very good quality of life, so in that respect also it would help. But I feel as though we would kind of lose a balance that nature has sort of created in a way, because we do have animals that hunt other animals. We do have animals that simply just eat plants. So a lot of what we do, even though we may take it too far, people who go out and hunt, say, deer, and then they eat the deer meat, they're simply helping. I mean, yes, they may do it for fun, they may do it because they enjoy eating deer meat, but they're also helping cut back on overpopulation of deer and any other species that may be hunted by people. So in a way, while becoming a vegetarian may help solve a lot of problems, I feel as though it may create some new problems that we would then have to solve later down the line as well.
I'm glad you brought up the red meat thing, because I just heard a statistic a couple days ago, and I'm not going to have the number exactly right, but it was an astounding percentage, like 75% of all the cropland, I think in this country, maybe it was the world, again, I should have written it down, but is for growing meat that people eat. And so just think about this ties in with what Professor Doley said about manure generation, manure management, things like that. So there's just so many examples, even just a few things that you brought up are so interconnected. I had a fortunate event for me to, I don't know if I'll be able to maintain it, but a few weeks ago the McDonald's in Doylestown burnt down. So I don't go to McDonald's anymore, because the closest one's about 3 miles away in New Britain, because I was in a bad habit of once a week going to McDonald's for lunch. So, every little thing to chip away at the goal of reducing your impact on the environment and eating more healthy foods is great. And I wanted to make a comment about, you mentioned Aldo Leopold. When I read his book, Sand County Almanac, in the early 70s, and the book was written, I think, in the 40s, that was one of the books, along with Silent Spring by Rachel Carson and The Population Bomb by the Ehrlichs, Paul Ehrlich, that got me interested in pursuing a career in environmental protection. And I didn't mention it in my introduction, but I was an environmental planner for Bucks County Planning Commission for 35 years before I was adjuncting here at the same time. But so that's how I got interested in the environment, because of those literary masterpieces that these people wrote.
One more. All right. No? All right, moving on. Really good. All right. So speaking about being vegetarian. Okay. So I was at a conference in 2009, and somebody put up a map of the United States and showed land use coverage. And most of the land, more than 50%, like what Dennis said, is dedicated to livestock production. But a lot of that land is not of high enough quality to grow human value food on. Livestock can eat grass and then turn that into protein that humans can eat. So there is a place, depending on the land, to include animals in a food production system. Also, if you are going to, so at this conference too, they brought up land use for biofuels, land use for human food, land use for animal food. And you get a visceral response from people if you ask them to change their diet. That is something that people hold so closely. You can ask them to ride their bicycle, you can ask them to not take airplanes, you can ask them to carry their own reusable bag to the grocery store. And they'll grumble, but most people will do it. But you ask someone to change their diet, and they get tight and angry inside. And so it's hard to convince people, even though they realize that maybe it'll shrink their carbon footprint. If you do want to go vegetarian or cut meat out of your diet a little bit, make sure you're doing it in a responsible way and still eating a complete protein, which would be a grain legume like a bean, chickpea, lentil, black beans, with the cereal grain, corn, rice, wheat, and eat them at the same time so that you get all your amino acids, and then you'll have your complete protein and you won't miss meat.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to quickly add one thing that's important to consider in terms of whether it's easier or hard to get people to change their diet. In fact, using advertising is very powerful to have people change their diet. In fact, in the 1950s in Korea, in the U.S., in order to expand its export of wheat, put on, they did these kitchens for Korean housewives to learn how to make sandwiches and to really incorporate more bread into their diet. And I mean, if you think of all the advertisements we've been exposed to growing up, we have changed the way we eat. So there are ways that you can alter people's diets, but there are powerful forces that, you know, even when we think of the consumption of meat, the amount of meat we eat worldwide has really gone up because of the way in which meat has been viewed as a very, you know, particularly beef has been viewed as part of the modern diet and held in an elevated status. Though a lot of that expansion has been of cheap meat. Just wanted to add that. There are ways that we can change.
So I have a quick question. I agree with all of you, first of all, up to a certain point. However, we're talking about changes and changes that we should do, but we don't really know the answer yet. As society, I believe we all know that we like what we have. We don't want to change if it works for us. However, are we giving something to change it for, something that will make it better? Or are we giving a solution that will just benefit a couple? Are we giving a solution that will benefit people, you know, who's just suffering from the deforestation? Or are we giving a solution for worldwide? I come from a third world country. I was born in Venezuela. The country right now is in a political, economical, and social crisis because they base their whole economy in petroleum. When gas was really expensive, we were a really rich country. In fact, we were the second power of the world in '68. However, once the petroleum, the prices start dropping, we could see how Venezuela started decaying with it. Not just because of the petroleum itself, but because we base our economy and everything around it. And, you know, we started hiring more people to get that need of gas production. But we didn't make our infrastructure bigger. We quadruplied the amount of people working for PDVSA, and that's the name of the company, or Exxon known here. But we didn't really have the resources to make it work. So when the economy started decaying, we couldn't do anything. There was a point of no turning back because we didn't really see what was coming, what was behind that, you know, that horizon of what's coming up. So that's my question right now. Are we actually trying to give a short-term solution and we are actually trying to, you know, let's see how it works? Or we're trying to move forward like into new generations, not just mine and the ones coming after mine, but more like far ahead from us, like 2110. Are we talking about that, or are we talking about immediate solutions that will actually help society right now? Because I believe that will make a huge change. If we're talking about something that is going to be done right now and will help us out right now, it might at the long run end up being like it happened with Venezuela. It might make in society decay up to a point of no turning back, where, you know, we have no more trees. Deforestation is a big problem, it is true. However, how are we going to replace the money behind it? it's not just about the trees, it's not just about the money, it's not just about the product, it's about the three of them all together. And how are we going to help those countries to actually solve the problem? It's easy to teach everyone here in America. It's easy for you guys to teach me because I am willing to hear. But how are we going to teach people that don't want to hear from us? How are we going to teach people that say, it has been working for us for so long, you're not from my country, you have no say in my country? That's what I'm trying to get out of here up to a point. I know it may be impossible to get something out this early in the game per se, but it's just good to think about how can we make our big change for the long run, not just for tomorrow.
I have a lot to say about this, but I don't want to.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think in the case of Venezuela or in the case of other countries in a similar situation as Venezuela, I mean, historically we can talk about the resource curse and what it means to really focus, put all your eggs mainly in one basket and not sufficiently or adequately diversify your economy. That said, and it's easy to kind of blame those countries, they didn't diversify their economy, and there's something to be said about that. However, if you're in a position in the world economy where you're not that powerful, that income you gain from that valuable resource is critical. And because you're so dependent on that income, and many people are dependent on that income and really benefit from it, it becomes much more difficult to diversify. So that's really what happened with Venezuela. That's what we've seen with other countries that depend on a particular resource, and in particular, when the market crashes or goes down in that resource, you're in trouble. Add to that the many loans that countries have taken out or different entities within that country have taken out. Suddenly, if you're not getting that income from that resource, you're not getting the foreign capital from that resource, you're in big trouble. And in Venezuela, we see there's a lot more to the history of Venezuela, but that we can go back to the dependence on oil and some of the political the way politics developed in a particular way as a result of the dependence of that oil. That said, if we look at a bigger picture, not just Venezuela, I mean, we can pay attention to such global organizations, international trade. I'm a materialist sociologist, so I really believe we have to pay attention to our economic relations. They really they shape how we farm, they shape how we produce goods. There are pressures to engage in deforestation because there are pressures to develop economically, and there are particular policies that govern what countries can and cannot do. So we can look at, right now we can pay attention to what's going on with the World Trade Organization. And we see right now the World Trade Organization is at a standstill because you have, in the past, you had the United States and European countries really exercising a lot of influence over such countries as Venezuela. Right now, things are changing, or there's somewhat of a standstill with the growing power of China, with the growing power of Brazil and India. In terms of solutions, I think pay attention to these relations, pay attention to, I think having a strong national economy, we need international relations and exchange. I'm not saying we don't, but we have to pay attention to the inequality of relationships between countries and between entities engaging in trade. And also pay attention to what's going on locally. That is where we can exert some power. And I think countries pay attention to the policies that are coming out that are going to have a greater impact. Again, I realize this is not a great solution. And I'm sorry?
And vote.
And vote, yes, of course, vote. Next week you want to vote. But recognize these interconnections. I'll just stop there. There's a lot I can say, but I know we have two more faculty members that have a lot to say as well. And I know Bill definitely has a lot to say about Venezuela.
Ms. Johnston, you're next.
This is my boss.
Do you want to switch spots? Do you want to switch spots? You can switch spots.
What's that?
Do you want to let Mr. Veal go? Or do you want to go?
I want to what?
Go ahead.
Okay. This is fascinating to me, really. How much fun. Can't believe it. And I've completely forgotten the story that I wanted to tell now. But I am actually going to kind of stay in the vein or along the theme of food we've been talking about a little bit. So I have a question for you guys. How many people here like salmon? That's a pretty good amount, right? Good stuff, right? I mean, it's a great source of protein, a great source of healthy fats, right? We love salmon. And if you were going to go to the grocery store tonight and pick up a piece of salmon, chances are it would be Atlantic salmon, right? And that's probably what we'd find in the grocery store right now. And most Atlantic salmon now is farmed. But every now and then, you can go into the grocery store and find a piece of sockeye, or maybe steelhead or king salmon, or you can order it online and have it delivered frozen to your doorstep. Right? And so these are the salmon of the Pacific Northwest. And I've been traveling out there to Seattle for about the better part of 20 years, maybe the last 17, 18 years. So I've spent a fair amount of time out there. And what I've noticed that I hear more and more and more about, I'm reading in the papers and watching the news, is the declining salmon numbers for the salmon of the Pacific Northwest. And there's been a lot of speculation as to what is causing the decline. So you probably can guess what some of those causes are. Overfishing. There's been speculation that there's overfishing going on. We have, over the last 50, 100 years more, put up dams for the major rivers. So salmon is a species that likes to spawn in fresh water. Sockeye, for example, will spend a year or two in the fresh water and then head out to the ocean. Well, they'll spend the next 2 or 3 years, and then they'll head back up to nice, cold, fresh water to spawn again, and this is their life cycle. And we've put a bunch of dams up, and the dams were installed for various reasons to help towns with water sources, with food sources, to generate power. We have hydroelectric dams out there. This is all along the Columbia River, and there's a tributary called the Snake River out there. And salmon have to get past these dams, so we built ladders, salmon ladders, to help them get up and around. Right? Others are speculating that climate change is warming the waters. There's pretty good evidence that that's happening right now. We've got a lot of data that show that. And that the warming waters are discouraging the salmon, that the salmon can't get far enough upstream to reach the really cold stuff that they like for spawning. And that's potentially, even out in the oceans, it's shortening their lifespan. Predators, of course, are an issue, right? So it's really a very complex issue. And there's no simple answer. And I was actually just reading a paper today that indicated that in the last 50 years, there have been less than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles published on this issue. Last 50 years, under 100. So nobody's really looking at this and what's going on. And the way that the government is very involved in this, of course, the way that the government is trying to capture accurate numbers, well, it's a hard thing to do. It's through observation, it's through fishing licenses, how many fishing licenses are there, all sorts of things. But there's a pretty large margin of error because of that. There's no great way. One of the biggest issues is helping these salmon get up over the ladders, especially with the warming waters, right? As the salmon are working their way up the salmon ladders, they're using a lot of their fuel source, a lot of ATP, right, for our students out there. A lot of ATP gets used up. And so how far upstream can they go? How much farther? Are they getting as far up as they need to, up into Canada, up into Idaho. Lots of tributaries in those areas, right? So we're really having trouble tracking these guys and figuring out what's going on. What we do know is that salmon are an important part of the ecosystems out there, right? Especially if you think about those freshwaters. Once the salmon spawn, they die, and their flesh then feeds the soil and feeds the other organisms in that area. So there's all of this connection between fishing. What is public policy? How are we managing those fishing licenses? There is farmed salmon. There's farmed sockeye salmon. You can probably find in the grocery store just about any time of year. Farmed versus freshwater. So they have, limited numbers of fish that can be caught freshwater. They have catch and release policies. And so we're trying to solve this problem. The question is it a problem? Well, again, it's a pretty good food source for us. There's a lot of economy around the salmon industry. And then we can also talk about the First Nations, right? The Native Americans that now we talk about history, right? For our students, think about all these different courses you're taking. We talk about the history of what the U.S. government did to the First Nations. And think about their reliance on fishing and those salmon. Their economy, it's huge. It's a huge piece of their economy. It's a huge piece of their nutrition and food source. So for me, when I think about One Health, that's kind of where I go, that it is all about understanding the biology, understanding a little bit about public policy, understanding a little bit about our government, understanding numbers, being able to do a little bit of math, right? And again, I'm really thinking about our students here and all these different courses that you're taking. It's understanding history, right? So One Health, to me, I see it as being absolutely a critical piece of your undergraduate education in learning how to learn about history and learning how to learn about public policy. You don't have to know everything now, but it's about learning how to learn. And that, I think, is what I would like to see you guys thinking about as you're going through your 4 years here.
Thank you. So one big thing that I've been hearing a lot about, so I don't even know where we are exactly here, but where I call home would be part of the Susquehanna River watershed, Chesapeake Bay watershed. And one huge problem with that is that there's this decline in oysters. Now, obviously, we're talking about two different organisms, but if we think back to, I guess it's what, 10,000 years ago or whatever, when agriculture was first started, we as humans realized that we can't just keep taking. We got to give an input. I mean, that's what agriculture is, that's what farming is, giving an input and farming it and getting an output. So one thing that I could see now, it's not necessarily a solution to that, but if we look at our oysters is, yeah, there's the argument about pollution and I'm a 30-minute hike. I said hike, not drive, from the Susquehanna River at home. But one major thing that really should be implemented in that, I believe, is that those people who are essentially depending on their, as a business, depending on harvesting these oysters, there maybe should be some kind of like a government-assisted farming program that would essentially replenish the population. Now, I understand that we all don't like our taxes. I mean, that's we're farmers, so I understand that because, yeah, you're trying to make a buck, but at the same time, you can't just take something, a resource, and just diminish it and beat the heck out of it. I
agree. I mean, I think that one of the important pieces of of this One Health concept is being forward-thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I just had a question about what you think consumers can do as far as salmon goes. Like, do we not purchase salmon? Like, do we avoid, like, how would we help salmon as
So I don't think we're there yet with the salmon populations because we're still trying to figure this out. So one of the big pieces that the Washington State, Oregon, Idaho governments, and I think British Columbia as well, they're trying to figure out how best to measure. And once we can get those measurements to be more accurate and reduce that margin of error, then we can start looking at each piece, right? This is a very complex issue with a lot of different things going on, especially with those warming ocean temps. There is it Monterey Bay? The Monterey Bay Aquarium has, if you go to their website, they do have a list of different sustainable fish, yep, and which fish not to purchase and all that sort of thing. So that's a great starting point. Oh, you've got the list?
Or
There you
the
go.
app. There is an
Monterey
app
Bay,
for
is that right, Reggie? Yeah.
Get the app.
Thanks, Natalie.
A couple of things. I think with the salmon, maybe, say at least 10, 15 years ago, I'm a nurse, when people started relating the health effects of red meats, and they said the omega-3s were better, there was this huge kick on, eat salmon, and your omega-3 rich fishes, and that somewhat led to it. And as far as I think what we can do as Professor in White, I'm sorry I forgot your name, was saying, as a society, is number one, get educated, as you're saying in here, and seeing what you can do as an individual and as a group. Bottles, plastic, get rid of them personally in your house, and maybe even in the school. How can the school be more environmentally sound? Can you source from fair trade? Can you have better selections of foods in your cafeteria? What sacrifices can you make, or choices, not just sacrifices, in eating? Why do we eat what we eat, as that gentleman was saying? We eat to comfort ourselves, to pacify ourselves, to de-stress, the choices that we make. What else can you do besides that? Taking a yoga class, learn to meditate. So there's various things we can do as individuals and as a group where you're your own society in a school to make certain changes. Learn about organizations that are helping our lands, like American Farmland Trust, that are trying to save our farms. Some building architectural companies that are starting agri-hoods instead of neighborhoods, where you build homes, but there's small farms where the neighborhood takes care of it. Learning about what companies are environmentally friendly. So there's a whole bunch of things we could do as individuals and as groups within amongst ourselves. There's great documentaries like down Food Inc. and Food Matters. If you watch some of those, you will not buy food and meats from certain companies. You will make sure that they're organic and environmentally and animal friendly. You won't go to McDonald's anymore. You see how some of these poor animals are treated, and you might eat less meat and more vegetables. Thank you.
I'm not sure. I'm going to keep this really short. I know you've got reading to do. I know some of you do anyway. One Health for me is, as a business person, I paralleled the age of globalization. Okay? That's one benefit of being as old as I am. I've seen what globalization has done. It has done some fantastic things. It has lifted people out of poverty. It has also put people in poverty. It's not the system, it's how it's used. And that can be said for capitalism itself. But for me, the issue is how we use resources for society. There are countries in this world, I've worked in 43 different countries. Countries like Taiwan, Singapore, they don't have any resources. This country of ours has resources of the yin-yang. That's a very technical business term. You take a place like Taiwan, it's a pile of rocks in the China Sea. Okay? Same thing with Singapore. They're both very, very successful economies. Their people live good lives. What do? What resource do they have? It's the people. They educate the hell out of their people. And it pays off. Where we are going wrong, as far as I'm concerned, is, and I'll go back to the age of globalization, which really took off after the Second World War. Ancient history to you guys. But what really took place? When the soldiers came home, there was the first GI Bill. And that GI Bill put millions of people into college that would never have gone to college. That was an investment in our future, your future. And we're kind of dropping the ball. We're investing in a lot of different things that are not paying off as richly as that did. And at the same time, we're harvesting, you can use that term, year after year, college graduates, well educated, with great futures ahead of them, but saddled with debt. We need to think about where we're investing our money, because we cannot depend on students going forth with under $200,000 worth of debt. That stops you in your tracks. And that's what concerns me about society and the health of it going forward. So short and sweet, I'll leave it at that because Tanya took all my stuff anyway, so it's all right. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Absolutely. Every year, let me tell you something, every year, the money that's invested in this country, 85% of it goes to money making money, financial investments. Only 15% of it goes to economic investments that basically bring greater productivity. And that's what we're not doing. If we were investing some of that money in students via paying for 2 years of community college for free, nothing's free, but it can go for free, that would be a different thing. So continue, I interrupted you, I'm sorry. Oh, very short term, absolutely, yes. Well, and I'll go to wind as well. You know, it's kind of a secret that we were one of the first countries to develop wind power and that sort of thing. The initial companies that we had in that field are now in Denmark. we kind of missed the boat there. So yeah, I think renewable is the way to go.
Can I add something? I just want to quickly add that, I mean, I think overall in the United States, what we lack is a real energy policy. We don't really have one, and you know, that's a real issue, that's a real problem.
That's a function of one of my favorite topics in macroeconomics is lobbyists. Okay? We could spend a couple days here, but I know you have things to do. I know you, I recognize you.
Right when Professor Casas was starting to talk about, when she just mentioned energy policy, I was thinking exactly the same thing. My first career out of college was teaching 8th grade science, and that was in 1973, and I was talking about different types of energy. I was teaching physical science, and Jimmy Carter was president, and Jimmy Carter was the only president, not the only president, but one of his main things, and probably part of the reason he got not elected for the second time, was he was really trying to come up with an energy policy for this country. And as Tanya said, we still don't have one. 50 years later, we'll never really. I don't think we're ever going to have one because there's just too much. Ends up being too political. And I wanted to come back to this gentleman here. You talked about the Chesapeake Bay situation with the oysters. Are your parents family farmers? I'm sure they will remember back to when the Chesapeake Bay Commission was formed. You know, the largest contribution to nutrients in the Chesapeake Bay comes from the farms in Pennsylvania. And so this ties directly in with what Dr. Doley was talking about, manure management. So proper manure management and using natural fertilizers and getting away from chemical fertilizers, but still having to manage it properly to keep it out of the waterways. If the Chesapeake Bay program hadn't started when it did, there wouldn't probably, Chesapeake Bay, you'd probably be able to just walk across it because we just bump one big sea of muck because of all the nutrients and algae and everything. So that actually, even though it still has a long way to go, and it's a continuous uphill battle. It's been a very, very successful program in general. And I wanted to see if our student panelists had anything else to add before because I think we're getting close to the.
Anything? I guess as a student, I mean, I look forward to learning a lot more about how everything is interconnected and related to everything, because I definitely have learned some things that I didn't quite think about or realize before. But I think we do, as I was saying before when we were talking about like vegetarianism, I do think that a lot of this has to do with balance, and that as people, we have kind of ignored the balance of the world. We've taken advantage of everything that we've really could have taken advantage of, and now it's coming back to bite us. So I think we definitely do need to look at how we're affecting things and how everything that we're affecting is affecting us and will continue to affect us as we continue to make the decisions that we do.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I don't think Jimmy Carter has been given the credit that he deserves, but as the century goes on, and we see more homeowners putting solar panels on their roof, as I just saw one a couple days ago. I think it's a beautiful thing. I was going to ask if anyone up there has something to say about the future of solar energy. Where is it going? Is it really going to grow as much as I think it should? And I have a couple other questions, but I forgot. I have to remind myself I'm not a professor, I'm just an old student. So I can't manipulate any of you. I have to keep my questions kind of open. So, okay.
I can respond to the solar in a short way. Just in this past Sunday's Inquirer, there was a whole two-page article on a couple in Chester County that had to go to court, had to sue the township in order to be able to install solar panels on their home. And because the township was overly restrictive on installation of solar panels on residences because of the quote-unquote aesthetics issue. And of course, you know, aesthetics, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so what's aesthetic to one person is, you know, not aesthetic to another. So just ridiculous that you would have a municipality restricting homeowners from, and then, you know, you have to end up in court. Fortunately, the homeowner, the husband of the homeowner couple is a lawyer, so maybe that helped. But anyways, there's, I think speaking of statistics that I didn't write down, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's about 35,000 people still in the coal industry, workers, miners, but there's like 250,000 people working in the solar industry. So it's definitely on its way up. This goes back to what the gentleman from Venezuela was talking about, is that change takes time. It's incremental. It's a little bit at a time. When you get to be, you know, my age, you'll have be able to look back and see how some things have changed for the positive, but it took, you know, decades. You know. And then coupled with that is the educating the people. This goes to what Bill was talking about as far as the educational people resource. And then the other thing that always is a game changer, and a lot of times to the negative, unfortunately, is what Tanya was talking about with the politics. So again, all these things end up being interconnected. But I'm really hopeful for the solar future of this country.
I just wanted to say the connecting theme here seems to be all the problems just seems to come back to, well, for example, who's doing all the monocultures? The capitalist. Who's doing all the fishing? The capitalist. And then who's doing all this supporting of the capitalist? The own inherent nature of humanity, which is selfishness. So, I forgot where I'm going next.
And I just want to quickly add, I don't think we do ourselves some credit when we assume that we're always just selfish, right? I think, you know, that becomes an excuse that inherently in human nature we're selfish. So I think we can focus on, you know, there are plenty of groups of people that actually demonstrate a lot of solidarity and interdependence and help each other out. There's a fascinating area, and when you think of change can happen slowly, incrementally. It can also happen rapidly because of disaster. There's a fascinating area of sociology called disaster sociology, and it looks at both man-made or human-made disasters and natural disasters, and compares communities, you know, how do they respond to these disasters. There's some communities that respond a lot better, and it really it depends on the types of relationships they have, the social networks they have within those communities. Are they much more individualistic communities, or are they communities that have formally formed ties among one another? But anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
All right, so two things. Number one was that I just kind of have thought of is a recent crisis, I guess we could say, in the agriculture industry, and that's the uprising of the spotted lanternfly. Now, I don't know a lot about them, but that's just something I just kind of thought about. It's an invasive species, and I don't know. I really don't know anything about them. But another thing that I kind of thought about is that if we look at a lot of regulation in the agriculture industry, as far as manure management plans and whatnot, I'm certified to haul manure, so like I understand that it is heavily regulated, and rightfully so. We're literally handling resources that could potentially cause a lot more disaster than what they are. But one thing that I see that's a major problem is human waste as well, because, please correct me if I'm wrong with this, I'm not educated in this, that a lot of human waste, especially after a large storm in our older infrastructures, older cities that were constructed before we got the idea of separating our gray water from our black water. In other words, human waste from shower water. When we'd have a big storm come through, all of a sudden our filtration systems are overloaded. Where does it go? It goes right into the watershed. That's a big problem that I can see. I don't know what to propose to solve that, but I'm just saying from a farmer's perspective that the farmer's not 100% of the blame. We do all we can, truly.
I definitely don't necessarily blame the farmers, the manure producers, or the manure spreaders. I think a lot of them do a really responsible job of following the regulations. I think a lot more needs to be done on the education front. There's some people who don't know how to meet the regulations, and what do you do when you have more nutrients coming into the system than you have going out of the system? And so that might have to change our agriculture production system at a larger scale, or the consumption system, or some other incentives need to be in place there to allow farmers to continue to make a living while maintaining high quality water, while producing food at a reasonable amount. But there's quarterly meetings at the Pennsylvania Nutrient Management Advisory Board in Harrisburg, and they're open to the public. And if you guys are interested in that, you can help affect policy on manure management in the state. So it's the Pennsylvania Nutrient Management Advisory Board. Play a part.
And thank God for the county conservation districts. Every county in Pennsylvania, except I think Philadelphia County, has a conservation district. And as farmer, how kinds of services and technical assistance and educational stuff that they provide, particularly with things like manure management, crop rotation, and contouring and things like that. They're just an invaluable resource that most people don't even know exist, except if you're a farmer working directly with them.
Innovative solutions. That's what we need, are solutions. You got to think outside the box, be innovative. Keep that mind sharp.
I feel what I gathered from all of this is what basically every one of you has said at one point, is that we have to evaluate what's going on around us and to find out the problem or what's occurring around us, then to take steps to better ourselves and everything around us, or the economy around us. And what I think is great about everyone up there is that you have to bring someone in from a part of every different part. You can't have all the same people because you need different perspectives. So I feel like gathering everyone else, all of us together today, we're taking a step forward ourselves today. We're educating, which is what we need.
So I guess what I wanted to.
Going back to what she said over there, I completely agree with that. My question from before, I believe that if I asked you, just one of you guys, I wouldn't have been satisfied with my solution, with the solution that you would have given me. However, by listening to all of you guys, I noticed that going from political aspects to agricultural to historically, everything relates, and everything does have a common solution per se. As you said with the solar panels and coal mining, it all requires time, and society will actually shift itself towards the best solution possible. So what I'm trying to get with this is, first of all, thank you all, because you guys opened my eyes today. I actually thought that, there was a problem, we didn't know the solution, we were trying to figure out the solution, but I believe that we're actually moving towards the solution slowly, but we're going. We're being there. We're making our effort. We're on the right track.
So I guess what I kind of wanted to turn it over to Reg in a second, but I really love it when these kind of organic conversations that we have spontaneously erupt the One Health concept, and really show that it's not so much staying within your comfort zone or staying within your discipline or staying within what you know, right? But it's taking your discipline and taking what you know and taking what interests you at the heart of it and finding like-minded individuals, right, that have different areas of expertise and have different areas of concern working together in an interdisciplinary environment, right? And that is what One Health is, right? It's people working together towards a solution to problems, right? But I feel like we kind of were a little bit on the downside. We brought up a lot of problems today, right? And maybe we haven't really highlighted so much a positive aspect of this. So I'm just going to give an example quick example of a positive One Health situation, right? And I know it brings us back to like disease and stuff, right? But it's a classic example. When we lost our iconic American animal, what's our iconic American animal? Bald eagle, right? When they started disappearing, did we stop hunting eagles? No, right? Did we all of a sudden not know what to do? Yes, right? And so we looked at problems, and the problem to the eagle situation involved a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary problem of farming, right? Of pest prevention, right? That led us into that remember that whole thing called DDT and eggshells, and I'm sure you remember from your bio textbooks, bioaccumulation. There's that classic, like, pyramid where the eagle's at the top, you know, and there's some plants at the bottom and fish in the middle, right? And this bioaccumulation idea, and that's like I would call that a positive One Health example because we fixed it, right? There are certain parts of the country now where eagles are considered pests, right? There are still many of them, right? You've talked to anybody from Alaska, they're like, eagles, right? And so, you know, in here we don't go, eagles, not in the Philadelphia region, right? But, you know, well, it depends on Sunday, how Sunday goes. But that's kind of how a positive example of a problem that had a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary solution, and we were able to enact it, right? So that's a positive aspect. So I like to always close on a more positive note, right? So I'll turn it over to Raj.
So I think tonight went really, really well, but I want to show of hands. How many of you, from listening to these conversations, had your thoughts taken from a different direction than you had ever thought before? That's One Health. That's getting to listen to different people's point of views. All of these problems that we have in the world are not single disciplinary problems. I don't care what your major is, you play a role. And so all the other people with different majors or different interests also play a role. Whether you're a consumer or a supplier, you play a role. And so one of the points of this whole thing is for you to be taking your education and going, oh, this isn't a course that's just a pain in my neck that I don't want to take. I guarantee you're going to need it. We need it. We need you to take that knowledge and apply it in different ways, in multidisciplinary ways. And so I am absolutely thrilled with our panel tonight, and I hope that you are too. And I am thrilled with the participation we've got from the audience, and I'm sorry we had to shut it down, but time's going on here. So thank you to our moderator as well.
We're going to shameless plug here really quick. If you like this kind of conversation, right, we have One Health meetings. We have a One Health working group, and we welcome students to join us, right? So ask Reg how to get on that email list. It's open to the community. We generally meet in the evening, so those of you from the community can participate. Second shameless plug is if you like these conversations and you think policy is important for your future and the future of the world, right, we have a Master's in Public Policy program here where you can specialize in natural resource management. And do we have something called a 4+1 program?
You have a 4+1?
I've heard, yeah, a 4+1 program. So those of you who aren't seniors can come and talk to Casas about that at our 4+1 program. And if you like that whole, one more shameless plug, if you like that whole food idea, we also this year started an interdisciplinary minor in food systems. And so if you want to be more specialized and more marketable for a future job market that involves food, because, well, everybody eats, and the way in which food is produced and transported and globally acquired, then you can come talk to me or Dr. Casas or just about anybody. Email me and I'll send you in the right place for the food systems minor. And we also have a food systems committee that has events every once or twice a semester on specifically food interdisciplinary issues. So, anybody else have a shameless plug since I had 3? Shameless plug, go.
Take environmental literature. It's a great course and it will change your world.
Counts for your requirement.
And our next One Health is November 14th, and that is going to be diseases within amphibians. And if you like oysters, you're going to love amphibians.
One last shameless plug. For the MPP program, we open our electives to upper level undergraduate students, and we're offering climate change action policy. So if you want to know about advocating for some of these issues, learning about local, national, and international climate change action policy, then sign up for our course. Look under MPP or Master of Public Policy program. You'll find it. Wednesday nights, 6:15 to 9, or 6 to 9.
When the students have any shameless plugs? Club announcements? Community members? Thank you very much.